Welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast for all Australian Apple computer enthusiasts and collectors.
Hi, and welcome to episode 49 of the Macdownunder Podcast. I'm Justin, and thanks for joining me for this episode. I've been getting lots of comments and likes and lots of great feedback about the last few episodes, so I hope you enjoy this one as well. Now, last week, we focused on the original Apple II and the various versions of that were available. So today we're going to focus on the Apple IIe, but we're also going to cover some news, some coming events, and our usual for sale finds. All right, well, let's get on to today's episode. Now, most Apple enthusiasts, particularly in Australia, will recognise the beige Apple IIe and probably the platinum Apple IIe that we got here in Australia. But there were, in fact, at least, six externally different Apple IIes, and in fact, I think you'll find there are a few more. Now, in 1982, Apple had experienced some mixed successes. The original Apple I, that they launched in 1976 established the company and did a good job getting them started. The original Apple II sold like gangbusters from 1977. However, the Apple III from 1980 didn't do quite so well. So in 1982, Apple was working on the Lisa still. It hadn't been released. It was working on the Mac. It hadn't yet been released, and they're also working on a replacement for the original Apple II. Now, this went by the name of the Super II, it went by the name of Diana, and it also went by the name of LCA for Low Cost Apple. But eventually, we'd come to know it as the Apple IIe, and the E being for enhanced. So let's find out how enhanced the Apple IIe actually was. So it was built to be backward compatible with the original Apple II. That way you could use the same software that schools and businesses worldwide were already using. But they want to make it better, more reliable, and preferably a bit cheaper. And so in the project, they tried to reduce the number of chips from the 120 chips that the Apple II originally had to something less. And so the original Apple IIe from the US, which this one is, got down to 31 chips. So that made it more reliable, it made it run cooler, and more importantly, less chips meant less cost, so it was also cheaper. So the Apple IIe still ran the same 8-bit 6502 processor that the original Apple II ran, and ran it at the same speed, just a little over 1 megahertz. It came with 64K of RAM, which for those in the know sounds like it's a bit more than the original Apple II. However, what they did was they used 48K of RAM and basically built in this 16K RAM card, the language card, that you could use as an option in the Apple II. So effectively, it came with the language card built in. It also came with 80-column support, which you could add to the Apple II with an extra card in slot 3. But the Apple IIe actually came with 80-column support built in. But there was a catch. You had to add an additional 1K of RAM to enable it. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But it came with an 80-column card built in. It also came with upper and lower case out of the box, which the Apple II actually never had. You could do it with the 80-column card, but you couldn't do it natively in 40 columns. The Apple IIe could. And it also had auto repeat built into the keyboard, which means if you hold a key down, it will repeat the key until you let it go. We're kind of used to that now, but that wasn't available in the original Apple II. And you might remember from a previous episode, in my Apple II Euro Plus, I had to build my own little circuit to provide auto repeat. So what else did it come with? Well, it came with the same basic speaker, 1-bit. It came with the same cassette data input and output. On the inside, it came with 7 of the Apple II slots the same slots that the old Apple II used, so you could swap interface cards between them. But it also came with an auxiliary slot instead of the slot 0 that used to be in the original Apple II. But the auxiliary slot came with a 60-pin connector and came with its own special cards. So in the USA, the layout of the board was such that this slot showed up next to the power supply. I'll show you a photo. In the European models that we got here in Australia, that auxiliary slot is actually located directly in front of slot 3, which makes sense because the old Apple IIs had the 80-column card in slot 3. So what did you use the auxiliary slot for? Well, that's where you put your 1K RAM card to enable 80 columns in the Apple IIe, but you could also get an extended 80-column card that came with 64K of RAM, meaning you could put your Apple IIe could come with 128K of addressable RAM. That also enabled the 80-column card. All right, internally, the Apple IIe came with the same 16-pin dual inline socket for game paddles as the Apple II did. It came with the same 4 pins so you could connect your RF modulator, so you can connect your Apple IIe to a TV if you wanted to. But it also came with an additional connector, 11 pins, to connect to an external keypad. Now, you might remember from an earlier episode, to add a keypad to the original Apple II, you basically needed to add a little circuit board to piggyback off the keyboard connector to run to your external keyboard. And if you did that, it was permanently attached because you'd have to open the lid, take the circuit board off, swap some cables around to remove your keypad. Whereas here, we could run a cable from the motherboard to the back of the computer and then plug in your keypad through a DB9 connector, making it much easier for business to attach and remove your keypad. And of course, that continued on. On the back of the machine, we had the NTSC composite color out. We had the cassette ports in and out to save and load data from cassette. But we also had a DB9 connector for your Apple joystick or your Apple paddles. So you could plug them inside from the DIL 9 to 16, same as the Apple II. But learning from the Apple III, they had a 9-pin connector on the back for your joystick as well. Now, whilst this particular machine from the US comes with an NTSC composite out, this Apple IIe from here in Australia, which is the international version, actually comes with PAL color straight out the back of the machine. And why is that? Well, that's because the European and the Australian versions of the Apple IIe had a PAL card built in, whereas the original Apple II, you had to add a PAL card. With the IIe, PAL was built in. So let's see how enhanced this Apple II really is. It's got a built-in language card, it's got a built-in 80-column card, and in Australia at least, it had a built-in PAL card. So fantastic. And a maximum of 128K addressable RAM. So not too bad out of the box. All right, the case was very similar to the original Apple II. The lid popped off from the Velcro in exactly the same way. The case is effectively the same. It does have some extra lugs to make it easier to remove the back of the lid. However, on the back, the original Apple II, as I'll show you, had these V's cut out of the case to allow you to have cables and things dangling out the back. Well, the Apple IIe took that far more seriously and came with a variety of slots that were pre-cut with blanks to cover them to keep the dust out. But the slots were cut in such a way that you could put your DB connector in there and you could connect it via the attachment screws onto the back of the case. So much more professional. Now, the international versions of the Apple IIe came with a larger character ROM. And so whilst the US version just came with the US characters, an international version, like the one we got here in Australia, came with double the size of the character ROM and a switch on the bottom of the computer, just in front of the keyboard, where you could switch from US English to your local language, or in our case, the British UK version. Now, the keyboard on the original Apple II was slightly different, as you can see. It's a lighter colour than the old Apple II, has the white keycaps, and this is what confuses people. The original Apple IIe had a light coloured keyboard with white keycaps. As you can see, we've got some additional keys. So we've gained the open and closed Apple and the cursor keys that were borrowed from the Apple III design. So that's the major change. But in addition to that, we could get international keyboards. And so there is the text-based keys for Control and Shift and Caps Lock. But there's also these icon-based keys, the international keyboard. You'll notice that the American keyboard, there's these two keys, the Caps Lock key and one of the character keys underneath the Shift, whereas in the European, International and the Australian model, we just get a really long Caps Lock. You notice the difference between the horizontal return key and the return key with the hook in it, and then you'll notice that again the international model has the symbol on it, whereas the Australian UK model has return written on it. So huge differences in the keyboards. Now in 1984, Apple updated the case, and so the lid and the lid closure mechanism was a cheaper, slightly cheaper design, but at the same time we got a new keyboard, so slightly darker keys and black text on the keypads, considered to be an upgrade both in function and aesthetics for the keyboard. And of course it came with a matching keypad that plugged into the back. Now in 1985, Apple released the Apple IIe Enhancement Kit. So the Enhancement Kit came with a 65C02 processor, which had additional instructions. It also came with an updated character ROM, which enabled mouse text, so that you could plug a mouse card and put a mouse on your Apple IIe and use Mouse Desk and Paint and various other GUI applications. And it came with improved firmware. It also came with a sticker to put over the power light of your Apple IIe to show that it had the enhancement. Originally, these came as a 65C02 sticker, probably from the technicians, but eventually that was replaced with an enhanced sticker. So from 1985, the Apple IIe came with those enhanced motherboards. And at about the same time, the cabling changed from the old black cables that were on things like the keypad and the joysticks to a beige cable design at about the same time as the enhancement and the case upgrade. Now in 1987, Apple released the platinum version of the Apple IIe, and I'm going to show it in reverse order here. In Europe, they used the same case design as was used previously internationally. So the same badge layout, the same keyboard layout, the same basic design, but in platinum. As you can see, the label's been changed to a platinum design, the keyboard has been changed to a platinum design, and the backplane has been changed to a platinum design. But otherwise, it looks the same as the previous models. In America, however, and as it happens in Australia as well, the Platinum IIe redesign went a bit further. So we got a new lid with no embedding for labels. In fact, we've got a silk screen Apple IIe on the lid, and the Apple logo moved to the other side of the computer in a small recessed embossed logo. But the big change that's pretty clear from just looking is we've now got an extended keyboard with the keypad built in. So again, it's all platinum design, but we've now got a keypad built in and our reset key has moved to above the escape key. So in fact, if we look at this Apple IIe keyboard, it is very reminiscent of the Apple IIgs keyboard that had just been launched a year earlier. So we got this enhanced case, we got the enhanced keyboard in our platinum Apple IIe. But that wasn't it. We also got some other changes. So the motherboard had some additional changes. So we reduced the chips from the 120 in the original Apple II to 31 in the original Apple IIe, and then in the Platinum version, that got down to just 24 chips in the American version. In the Australian version, we still had some additional chips for PAL color. What I haven't mentioned in terms of motherboards is that there was a few other variations. So the original Apple IIe motherboard was launched in 1983, and it didn't take long for engineers to discover you could get double low res, but more importantly, double high res graphics. So there was a version B of that motherboard, and there were lots of upgrades done. And this model, in fact, has that second revision motherboard on board. Then, of course, we had the enhancement kit with the 65C02 processor that would later be used in the Apple IIc as well. So there's 3 versions, and of course in the Platinum version we've got the reduced chip count as well. So there's 4 versions at least. But even then, in the examples that I've got here, there are variations on the motherboards, again, in the number of chips, in their location, where the ports are configured, but also some additional switches. So whilst it's not well documented, and in my research I couldn't find references to these other changes, there are many more versions of the motherboard out there than these basic ones I've spoken about today. The other change with these Platinum IIes is in the factory. They were fitted with an additional 64K extended 80 column card from the factory. So these came 128K out of the box. Now, in terms of power supplies, the earlier model Apple IIes came with a bronze or gold coloured power supply from Aztec or Dynacomp, but later Apples came with a silver enclosure, and some even had vents in them, and I'll put up a photo of those various versions. And of course there were the 110 version for the US and the 240 volt version for Europe and here in Australia. All right, there is one more upgrade that I want to talk about. So in 1986, alongside the launch of the Apple IIgs, there was an upgrade kit available for the Apple IIe. And so it comprised of a new label for Apple IIgs. It came with the new motherboard, which was the Apple IIgs motherboard, and it came with a new backplane and base plate that allowed the ports for the Apple IIgs to be used. Not only that, if you told Apple that you had the wrong case, so a platinum case or the very early case that wouldn't fit this upgrade, they'd send you a whole case as well. So this Apple IIgs upgrade meant that the only thing that might be original is the power supply and maybe the keyboard. So a significant upgrade. It's called the Stealth GS, and you can see why, because it looks from the outside to be an Apple IIe, but in fact it's an Apple IIgs inside. So, have you got an Apple IIe in your collection? Which one have you got? Which one's your favourite? Do you still use it? I'd love to know. Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. On to recent news. And over on the Macintosh enthusiast group on Facebook, user Marcio has been posting about their 68K visual catalogue of retro Macintosh software. So it looks like it's a bit of a Finder version of the catalogue for Macintosh Garden. So take a look, link down in the description. On the Apple II enthusiast group on Facebook, user Raleigh has posted about yet another VGA card for the Apple II. This one's the A2 VGA version 2, based on a cheap, simple Pico board. It does what a lot of the others do, but I suspect it's a lot easier to build and probably therefore a bit cheaper too. So if you're interested in one of those, have a look at the link down in the description. And last up, over on the 68K Macintosh Liberation Army forums, user Abinert has described how he's put together a 3D printable iMac replacement screen bezel. So all of you G3 iMac enthusiasts, including myself, here's what you need: a 3D printable replacement bezel. And he's provided the STLs, etc., etc. So fantastic work. Check out the link in the description. On to coming events, and the Adelaide Retro Computing Group have their next meeting on Friday the 14th of August from 5:30 p.m. in the Unley Community Centre in Unley, South Australia. The Mac Museum have their next open day on Saturday the 8th of August from 10 a.m. in Somerville, Victoria. Technology Markets have got their next market and retro computing show on Sunday the 2nd of August at the Darebin Community Sports Stadium in Reservoir. Retro Gaming Bendigo have their next meeting on Saturday the 1st of August, 12 o'clock for a 12:30 start in the Huntley Memorial Hall in Huntley, Victoria, near Bendigo. WasFest have their next get-together on the 25th of July, again in a private home, but I think there's also an online option. Check the link in the description and reach out to the organisers for details. And if you have a retro computing event, particularly an Apple-related one, please reach out and let me know. I'd be happy to include it in our list. On to today's for sale items. So looking for Apple IIe things this week. And first up, we have a vintage Apple IIe computer recapped, restored, serviced and tested. This is the beige model, enhanced in the second version case with an extended 80 column card, but please note no 5.25 inch disk drive card, even though it's in the photos, it is not included. This is from friend of the show, Danny, and he is asking for $890 in Victoria. Next up, same seller, this time a vintage Apple IIe in platinum. Also recapped, restored, serviced and tested, 128Ks, but no disk interface card, even though it's in the photo. This one's in Victoria, also for $890. Next up, we have an Apple II memory expansion card for the Apple II, 2 Plus or the 2E. Now this is a 256K RAM card. It's the Slinky card, so it can actually be expanded to 1 megabyte of memory for your Apple II, but currently has 256K. This is also in Victoria for $317. Next up, we have a vintage original Apple IIe graphics card with 64K of RAM, rare Australian model. Well, this is the 80 column extended card, and it's the Australian version. And the special thing, if you look in the photos, is this plugs into not only the auxiliary slot, but it plugs into the auxiliary slot and slot 3. So that's only useful in the Australian version of the Apple IIe. Anyway, this one's available in Victoria for $264 or thereabouts. Next up, we have another 80 column card. This is the standard 80 column card with 1K of RAM. This one's in Victoria for a budget $75. And last up, we have another extended 80 column card. This has got the 64K in it, but it's a tiny little card. Gets you up to 128K on the computer. This one's in Victoria for a very mere $69. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 49 of the Macdownunder Podcast and a look over the Apple IIe. So that means we've now covered the Apple II, the Apple IIe, the Apple IIc and the Apple IIgs, pretty much all of the Apple II series. So what should we talk about next week? Maybe the Apple III? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And until I see you next time, take care. Thank you for joining the Macdownunder Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.